بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وبعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Of course, this is day number 2, and we're going to pick up where we left off, and hopefully everyone had time to review the class as required, and the biographical information about our author, Ibn Shaykh al-Hazamiyin, rahimahullah ta'ala. That introductory material is extremely important, as well as the biographical video. It covers some material that obviously is not going to be in the text, but I think is going to help frame what it is that we're talking about and studying, and maybe even clear out some doubts or some feelings of apprehension or anxiety. So to get right back into it, we're going to pick up right here. So after his introductory words, he says, I bear witness that there is no deity worthy of worship other than Allah, alone and without partner, the sustainer, maintaining his servants, who includes them in his bounty and ever-increasing favor. I bear witness that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his servant and messenger, the originator of good, the medium to all favor, whose return is awaited in the hereafter. So, just briefly, we know the role of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam as a medium, and I don't mean that in the metaphysical medium where they're channeling spirits and things, but I do mean that as in he's our path to Allah. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the one that delivers the message, provides clear instruction, gives divine counsel, and embodies the teachings of our faith in action. And so through him we're able to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why Allah Azza wa Jal has equated our obedience to him, Azza wa Jal, the obedience to the divine, he's equated it, or I should say the obedience of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam with his obedience. He says, whoever obeys the messenger has obeyed Allah. And he commands us to follow the messenger, etc., as a testament to our faith. He goes on and he says, may prayers be upon him, his family and companions, so long as his virtue is sought by the arrivers and the people of love emanate as a result of divine affection. If Allah were to open the servant's insight into the various sciences, and we're talking about the spiritual sciences here, and provide him with a clear mind and a window into comprehension, nurses from the legal sciences a full term, comes into possession from its raiment or its adornment, and from that is a beautiful veil, effectively contemplates on the details of commands and prohibitions, is aware of the manner in which incidents are attributed to the original sources or their source origins, meaning everything goes back to Allah. I mean, whatever that may be, if you're able to do that, because that is something that many people struggle with or overlook, being able to return things back to their source origin of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is going to be a very important exercise for us as we progress in our spiritual growth. In order to reach the higher levels, I guess, if you will, of spiritual awareness and endeavor, a person has to be able to acknowledge and recognize almost instinctually the role that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala plays in their life, and is able to see the signs of Allah and his actions around us. He says, then he'll be worthy of donning the cloak of their deeds and to taste the pure spirits and the realities of their states. The pure spirits, we're talking about, he's able to drink, I guess, if you will, from the cup of the, this spiritual delight, basically tasting the delights of pure faith and reveling in the knowledge, if you will, that you've been given, the knowledge of Allah Azza wa Jal. So there's a couple of things to point out. Number one is the Imam talking about nursing from the legal sciences a full term, and that means that there is a pursuit of knowledge. To study the legal sciences of Islam, a person has to kind of be developed through that pursuit of knowledge. reverential fear of Allah only comes to those that are learned. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. Only those that are truly knowledgeable are the ones that are able to have reverential fear of Him. So this spiritual development and growth is not something that you simply just hope for or something that you can conjure in your own mind, but it's something that you have to pursue. And there are multiple avenues to doing that, and one of those is through a pursuit of sound Islamic knowledge. That's important. The next thing that I want to draw your attention to here is at the end of this, when he says they will taste the pure of their spirits and the realities of their states. So we're talking about states, and we're talking about stations here. Okay, so this is another technical term to be aware of. Two technical terms in the pursuit of this topic. There is a hal, which is a state, or ahwal, which are states, and then there's a maqam, which is a station, or maqamat, which are stations. They also use the word manazil for stations as well, or manzila. Those are kind of synonymous. So the difference between a state and a station, what is that? So, because you're going to hear this repeated in the book, you're going to see this come up. So a state, they're like temporary conditions which a person is gifted, or it comes as a result of great endeavor. So these are like spiritual states that a person can experience temporarily. You have temporary moments of certain things, of awe or of hope in Allah or love or whatever it may be. And then there are maqamat. So the states, as I said, are temporary. And this is what Al-Junayd, we'll talk about him shortly, Al-Junayd, one of the great imams of the past of Baghdad, he said that states, they come and go, they do not remain. Whereas the maqam, it is a station. Okay? It is a station which a person strives to reach and continues to ascend until they perfect their spiritual development. So if you, for example, were to look at here in this text, we're going to see nine foundations or principles we could consider like 9 stations we are going to work our way through. We're going to try to work one to the next and graduate through them. More expansive works such as Manazil al-Sa'irin, which was written by Imam al-Harawi al-Ansari. He had 99 stations that he talked about, and that was later. And this, our author, Rahimahullah, Ibn Shaykh al-Hazamin, actually did an explanation of that. It was a partial explanation. He almost completed it. But also Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyya, Rahimahullah ta'ala, many of you may be familiar with, more so than some of these names I'm mentioning. He also explained that work. And it's something that you have to work through and develop over, a period of your life. So you have some clarity on those terms. So when you hear the word state, now you know what that means. If you hear the word station, now you understand a little bit more about what that is. He says, this is what the soundness of the servant is based on. It's because the servant's full integrity is only reached through sound servitude of Allah the Mighty and Majestic, which is made up of an outer body, an inclined spirit, a distinguished mind, a governing heart, and an integral soul. So now we're going to get into some prerequisite understanding of what all is involved in growing in a spiritual sense, or developing yourself in a spiritual way. There are these elements. These are fundamental elements in which the Imam points out for us. There's an outer body, that's 1. Inclined spirit, that's 2. The distinguished mind, that's 3. Or the governing heart is 4. And the integral soul is number 5. So what we're talking about here is essentially the body being al-jism. We all understand what that is. Then we're talking about the inclined spirit. The spirit here is, the word in Arabic is nafs. Okay, and there's a lot of debate about what's the difference between a nafs and a ruh. The soul is the ruh. Integral soul is the ruh. So is there a difference between these two? It depends on how they're used, what the context is, and then who you talk to about it, or who you're taught by in terms of the difference. Obviously, here the Imam is drawing some type of difference between the two things, and we'll look at that to understand why shortly. And then, obviously, there's a distinguished mind and a governing heart. Again, the mind and the heart, those are other points where people are, well, where is the human intellect? Where is insight? Where is that located? Is it in the brain? Is it in the heart? And this was discussed briefly in the epilogue of Qala'idul Aqyan, which was the golden pendant, and we've gone over that in the past, talking about the seat of insight, and reason is the heart, though it is connected to the mind. So there's a role that both play. So all of these things are integral to the development of our spirituality. So he begins and kind of highlights some of this. He says, the pinnacle of bodily servitude is proficiency performing actions of the law and refraining from its prohibitions with clarity and comprehension. And this part, the bodily servitude, that means the physical acts of worship, etc. This is about mechanical things, how to pray, what to do, what not to do, what is halal, what is haram. The movements of the rites and rituals. It's very physical, which is needed. We can't relinquish this and say, look, this is dogmatic, this doesn't make sense, this is not needed, this is too rigid. These things are very important to push the body into positions of servitude and worship is needed in order to bend the positions of the spirit, in order to kind of bend the knee of the ego. So we need the physical worship, but it can't just be physical. So Islam can't always be performative in nature. It can't always be about what the person's doing outwardly, because inwardly is also very important. And the outward actions are meant to impact the inner spirit of who we are. So that's the first part. The second part is the pinnacle of the spirit's servitude is in its alignment with its master, the master being Allah, loving what he loves and despising what he despises. This only holds true for those who have with a tranquil soul, and not of those with an insightful or blameworthy soul. Or here, a nafs is what would probably be better to translate as opposed to soul, so we're not confused. This only holds true for those with a tranquil spirit, and not of those with an insightful or blameworthy spirit or nafs. So these are three different types of nafs here that are described by the Imam, and this is actually derived from the Quran. If you look into the Quran in Surah Al-Fajr, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyatuha nafsul mutma'inna, to the righteous will be said, reassured nafs. Oh, reassured nafs. So there's the first one. Another verse in Al-Qiyamah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِالنَّفْسِ اللَّوَّامَةِ, and I swear by the self-reproaching nafs. And then lastly, إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَّارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ, indeed, the nafs incites to evil, if you will. He says, إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَّارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ, indeed, the nafs incites to evil. And so, basically, what we're getting at here is with the human spirit. That's where I'm trying to get at with this translation of the human spirit. It means our inclinations. What are our inclinations? Our inclinations, they can either be inclinations that are reassured by way of faith and belief, and they're righteous in nature, or they're self-reproaching, and that's typically what happens after we commit sin. So we have this natural kind of response to what we know and hold to be wrong, and so we hold ourselves in contempt. We are remorseful and saddened by what we've done. And then, of course, there is that which leads us to temptation, that is our inclinations towards evil. So in order to have the nafs, the human spirit, totally devoted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it means that it has to be trained to the point that it's inclined only to that which Allah loves and is pleased with. And it finds repugnant that which Allah despises and abhors. So there you go. Beyond just a physical approach to worship and servitude, now you have this second layer, if you will, of your inclinations and your spirit as a human being. The next part, he says, the pinnacle of intellectual servitude is in filling it with the intricacies of the knowledge of commands and prohibitions. These are al-awamir wal-nawahi. Okay, so again, we go back to that pursuit of knowledge. That if you want to pursue spiritual growth, your mind also has to be invested in. What you fill your mind with is going to be of extreme importance. What it is that is rattling around up there in your head all day long, and what helps create a framework of how you view the world around you and how you perceive things and respond to things intellectually, is going to also be a very essential element to your spiritual development. So what you're having to do, much like what we're doing here, is we're pursuing knowledge, we're learning, we're trying to enrich ourselves intellectually so that we can develop spiritually. Okay, so again, this is another level. So this is like the third level, if you will, or let's say this is the third dimension of spiritual growth. The next one, the Imam, he goes on, he says, the pinnacle of the heart's servitude is the dedication of its focus to the divine attributes, establishing the rulings of their devotion, such as fear and hope, reverential fear and pleasure, trust, love in a general sense, divine supervision, etc., which pertain to the servitude derived from the rulings of the divine attributes. And this is in reference to the actions of the heart. Those actions of the heart that I mentioned, like love and fear and hope, reverential fear, those are all actions that occur in the heart. And these actions of the heart are to be in response to your knowledge and awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the divine. Meaning that you have become familiar with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divine attributes to the point that they incite these feelings in you, that you are in awe of Allah. You are amazed by Allah. And these are the feelings that creep into the heart or that occupy the heart. And so this is how a person develops spirituality within their own heart. Or servitude, which is al-ubudiyya, the servitude of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the heart, because you have understood the divine qualities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore your heart is worshiping Allah based on the response to those divine attributes. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides for you, the response of the heart is of gratitude. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows you mercy, the heart's response is love, etc. And the next, that's the fourth dimension. And the fifth dimension, is the pinnacle of the soul servitude. And this is when it's released into the open plains of divine proximity. So divine proximity here is talking about al-qurb. Al-qurb is the strength of your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How close you are to Allah azza wa jal. And we know that the closeness is achieved, it's kind of a two-way street, if you will. That when you draw near to Allah through righteousness and acts of obedience and devotion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will draw near to you, more so than you did to Him. And when you stay away and refrain from sin and evil, then similar, this is an obligation that has to be fulfilled. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will draw near and closer to you. And to the point that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins to protect you from evil and sin and misguidance. And so here the soul is kind of now in a position of being close to Allah, and so it enjoys that divine proximity. It says its passion for exclusive love which is set ablaze by means of the traces of the owner of majesty and honor, which are revealed to it. So these are, again, the traces of Allah, which we're going to talk about in more detail later. But essentially, as previously indicated, these are, his signs, the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether they are in his creation or the result of his actions. And this is how a person's soul becomes, enveloped in I guess, love with Allah Azza wa Jal. He says, it thus becomes a rolling sea from the breezes of divine proximity and winds of sincere affection, ignited by the fires of love, captivated by the gravitational forces of yearning. Whoever seeks to perfect their disposition and desires to rectify their nature must seek to perfect every part, the body, the spirit, the mind, the heart, and the soul, and be aware of leaving this world while a part of you is deficient and has not served Allah the Mighty and Majestic in its associated manner of worship. Okay, so, now you kind of understand that there are these 5 layers to your development. If you're not balanced in developing spiritually, then you're not going to be successful. Everything has to be worked on together. Okay, so again, we're talking about achieving a type of balance, not getting fixated on one thing or the other, and that's where we find misguidance and deviations when somebody goes to the extremes with one of these things or the other without packaging them together. It says, if you are incapable of perfecting every part of your being, as has been explained, then you must believe in it and be aware of it. It says, for whoever knows something and believes in it, even though they are unable to obtain it, has risen above the peculiars of ignorance. It says, your rising above the depths of ignorance to knowledge is more tolerable than the degradation of both ignorance and neglect. So, it's kind of like the lesser of two evils is, all right, I acknowledge the fact that this is the path. The path is comprised of these things. There's a body. There's a human spirit. There's an intellect. There's a heart. And there's a soul. And I have to work on all of these if I want to grow and develop spiritually, to gain that proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in order to be successful and achieve all that I desire in paradise. But I struggle, and I find myself lacking and wanting and feeling incapable at times. That is much better than a person ignoring that or denying that. Like, I know better, I'm just struggling to do better. Whereas I don't know any better, and so I think I'm doing better. And so that's why the Imam says, one evil is more tolerable than 2. One loss is better than 2. And it is Allah with whom help is sought. So just because something is uncomfortable doesn't justify its dismissal. Whatever that thing may be within Islam, whether that's a particular issue of rule and law, a particular issue of doctrine, a particular issue of worship, the rites and rituals, the do's and don'ts, the spiritual growth and exercises that you have to go through to develop as a believer. If it's uncomfortable to you, the problem doesn't lie within our faith to the point of it being dismissed. And I'm talking about having a sound understanding of that, not a warped understanding. Then the problem lies in the understanding and not the issue itself. Or the problem lies within our desires and within our inclinations to want to pull away from that. So, kind of the spiritually immature approach would be to dismiss those things. Well, that doesn't work for me, so that's not important, or that's outdated, or that's antiquated, or that's not applicable, when in fact it very well may be what is needed to solve your problem and to get you past to the next station. So without at least acknowledging the areas in your life which need improvement, you're never going to improve in them. Kind of like acknowledging the problem in order to solve the problem. And so this acknowledgement is a requisite for learning the ways of the pious from the practitioners of piety. Learning the ways of the pious, okay, from those that actually achieved piety. So the Imam here, he goes on. He says, so long as you have understood that, you put faith in it. You put faith in the process and become aware of the virtue of someone whole who has achieved, relative perfection. You become aware of the severe need for it. It should be clear to you, and you will have become aware of the spiritual guide's virtue, the realized virtue of following their judgment, yielding to them and being well-mannered with them. You will have also become aware of the true loss due to missing out on their companionship, not benefiting from them, opposing them, and poor compliance with them. So here the Imam is talking about, is going to begin speaking about the manners that you observe with your spiritual guide or your teacher. Knowledge is very important, but it's only as beneficial as it is applied and humility is gained from it. And so the tradition of Islam is that there is a teacher-student, master-pupil relationship, and the master is one who has dedicated himself or herself to a pursuit to the point that they have failed more than the pupil has attempted or even tried. So they have gone down all of the roads and have failed at every turn and bend that they can see where the student or the pupil is headed, and with relative understanding, and they can help guide them so they don't have to make those mistakes and pitfalls, etc., that have been made before. It kind of streamlines the process, and that is something that is extremely valuable. And so the Imam says, maintain manners with them like the experience seekers and protect them for the sake of Allah. Protect your sheikh, protect your imam, protect your spiritual guide. I'm not talking about myself here. I'm talking about our imams like Ibn Shaykh al-Hazamiyin and the likes of them. It says, look to them for the first and the last, the hidden and the apparent. So the hidden and the apparent, we're not talking about the unseen and the seen world. We're talking about hidden as in the internal workings, right? The internal conditions and states and actions of the human. The apparent are, the outward actions and manners and etiquette. So we're going to look to our spiritual teachers and guides for both what's going on inside as well as what's going on outside. And do not attach your heart to them without Allah, and God willing, or by the will of Allah, Allah will preserve your integrity by way of them. And so this is a rather balanced perspective here, that you give a great deal of respect to your teachers and your spiritual guides. You love them for what they are doing for you. You protect them. You seek to interact with them in the best of ways and pious manners. And many scholars of the past have written entire works on the etiquette of the student and the teacher. And those are very powerful. And unfortunately, in our day and age, we've drifted from those etiquettes and manners, because before it was, really access to knowledge was through your teacher. You didn't have access like we have access today. And what happens today is because we have such access to things, and we are so quick to confidence in our understanding by way of the internet or search engines or instant knowledge. It's fast food knowledge. There's a false sense of confidence and security in the little crumbs that we've picked up, that we devalue the role of the teacher and the guide. Whereas in the past, they were kind of like an integral part of the process. They still are, but they were acknowledged for it at that time. So, we're indebted to our teachers for being our guides. Without them, we would certainly be wandering in the darkness. But as they are simply a part of the process, the ultimate the ultimate dedication and reliance is upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we are not going to get our hearts attached to any one particular shaykh or scholar or spiritual instructor. We're not going to invest ourselves entirely in them without Allah. What happens if you uncover something from your teacher? There's a slip, there's a blunder, there's something unforeseen and unexpected, or something you would not have ever imagined that may emanate from them. I've seen it among people today that when they see their teacher who they've invested their spirituality into and their faith into, as if like, look, so long as they're doing well, then I'm doing well. When a calamity befalls them, then they lose hope, and some even lose faith, and they turn away. And that's the exact opposite of what it is that we want to be doing. And so we're constantly not only developing the relationship that we should with our teachers, but that relationship should be deepening our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If your relationship with your teacher is not developing your relationship with Allah, then there's something wrong. And that should be kind of a litmus test as to, the nature of that relationship. So he says, etiquette of accompanying the teachers is given precedence over all etiquettes. Whoever preserves it, Allah will preserve their state of being according to their etiquette with them. And so now he goes on and mentions some practical manners. He says, such a transaction. So you have to see this. The etiquette and the manner that you have with your teachers is like an exchange or a transaction with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Transaction with Allah includes politely listening to them. Abandoning any discord with them. Foregoing any accusations against them or argumentation with them. Right? You want to give your teacher, your sheikh, your guide a wide road. They're human beings. They have gone the distance, but they're not divine. So they're going to make mistakes. They're going to forget. They're going to, as it should be expected of them. Basically, you need to set realistic standards and expectations. They're not like the average person. They should not be expected to be so, but they're not angels either. Okay? And so the interaction should be framed by proper expectations. He says, avoid argumentation, politely seeking clarification with gentle words on their ambiguous expressions or conditions, meaning the ahwal. If you see something then that you don't understand, then you should politely inquire. You should be humble, kind and humble with them, to be quiet when they are closed off, to take advantage of their time when they're open, and to be in need of Allah, the mighty and majestic, regarding it all in order that the servant's care be entrusted to him. Basically, your care as a servant is entrusted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and a means of doing that is these types of manners. He says they are intermediaries. They're intermediaries very much like the Prophet is an intermediary, a medium to Allah. They are intermediaries. From their manners, the provisions of the path are obtained, and from their robes, the adornment, I guess if you will, the adornment of knowledge, if that's how we would say it, and insight, spiritual insight is the robe that they wear. The light of the quest is perceived. Again, using what you learn from them is how you perceive the light of this spiritual quest. He says, manners with them is considered manners with Allah, the mighty and majestic, and his servant, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because they are his inheritors. As the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the scholars are the inheritors of the prophets. They have inherited a portion of his inner state. There we go, we're talking about the ahwal. Just as the jurist has inherited a portion of his outer action. So the jurist understands the halal and the haram, the makruh and the mandub. They understand the rulings. The jurist is the faqih. They understand these rulings. You do this, you do that. What happens when you do this? What happens when you do that? Is this permissible or not? Whereas the spiritual teacher understands the inner conditions of the spirit, of the soul, of the mind. They understand the spiritual development and how to achieve it. Just as the jurist has inherited a portion of his outer action, and all are contributors to the endeavor. So all of that is good. It's all necessary. And success lies with Allah. So we're going to wrap it up here with this last section, origins of Gnosis and love of Allah. So this is ma'rifah and mahabba. Okay? So the Imam, he says, the foundation of Gnosis and faith in Allah, the mighty and majestic, and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, is faith in Allah, the mighty and majestic, and His Messenger. So here's the foundation. This is the origin. It's faith in Allah, al-imanu billah, and of course the iman in the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And that those two pillars are included in the pillars of iman. You know, to believe in Allah, to believe in His messengers. It's also a part of the shahada, to bear witness that there's no deity worthy of worship except Allah, and that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the messenger and the final prophet. It says faith emerges from awareness of the messenger. This is essential. I cannot stress this enough. This is one of the most powerful points that the Imam puts forth in this kind of opening, providing us some prerequisites to our pursuit of spiritual growth, is to become acquainted with the Prophet ﷺ as the intermediary, as the gatekeeper to Allah. Let's look at it that way. As the Prophet ﷺ is like acting as the gatekeeper to Allah. And that's why Allah says in the Quran, you know, the challenge is, in kuntum tuhibbun Allah, if you truly love Allah, fattabi'uni, then follow me. Yuhibbukum Allah, then Allah will love you in return. Because the Prophet is standing there between you and Allah. He's going to get you there. And so, if you don't know your Prophet, how are you going to love your Prophet enough to want to do what He's instructed you to do? How are you going to know your Prophet enough, be acquainted, intimately acquainted with him enough that, look, my Prophet said do this, I love my Prophet, I trust my Prophet, I believe in my Prophet ﷺ, so I'm going to do what it is that he instructs. I mean, that's how we act with people. You know, my beloved, I want to make them happy. The person that I love, I want them to be happy with me. And so I'm going to try and cater to the things that they require of me and ask of me and want of me. We do that with each other all the time. And we are able to do that, and this, of course, is a very, you know, it's a different type of love at times, but, you know, there are some similarities there because we've gotten to know that person, and we value that person. And so the only way that we're going to get to know and to value our beloved Prophet ﷺ is by knowing his biography, his sunnah, the battles, the miracles, the signs, and the wonders. And based on that, the issue of prophethood becomes known. That's how the people knew he was a prophet, because they knew who he was and they trusted who he was, and then they saw the signs of prophethood and the miracles, etc. And so they were no longer in there. There was just no doubt. There's no way to say, like, is this real? Is this a movie? Is this, you know, a fairy tale? But it becomes known, and its proofs and its evidence emerge in the heart. It says, when the issue of prophethood is known and its signs and evidence is settled in its hearts, it becomes a seat for knowledge, the knowledge of monotheism, the knowledge of Allah's oneness, and a path to the Gnosis of the magnificent Lord, who has sent and dispatched. He's the one that sent and dispatched those prophets and messengers. It says, this is because prophethood is from the signs, proofs, and evidence of Allah, the mighty and majestic. For whoever has the capacity to understand is free of turbidity, and this is like, you know, corrosion of the heart, if you will. It's free of corrosion and seeks to be rid of it. Basically, the heart is sound enough to accept these things. I mean, we talked about the covering and the concealing of the heart. So if the heart is open enough to accept this, then it will be accepted. He goes on and says, most of those who have been veiled from the realities of monotheism, even though they are knowledgeable of the Sunnah and its intricacies, have been veiled because they simply sought the legal rulings from the Sunnah, and their aspirations did not include awareness of faith's realities. Another powerful, very powerful point put forth by the Imam. Right? You will find people that may be knowledgeable of the Sunnah and they know the details of the Sunnah, but, you know, they're veiled from, you know, true awareness of Allah, true awareness of faith and its realities, because they were limited in their pursuit. They were looking for legal rulings. They wanted to know, what is this? What is that? What is this? And often that is the result of their intention. So he says, if they were to intentionally seek it, meaning the ma'rifah, they would have understood. But their aspirations were directed to the love of this world and the obtainment of lofty positions within it. They wanted to be somebody. They wanted to acquire something. They wanted to obtain a position or an influence or something in their society. Their hearts have opened to the auspices of this world, turned away from the auspices of the hereafter, and concealed from the proof of gnosis and relish of love, because their heart was not open. It was corroded and corrupted with a false intention, even though they were able to pick up some knowledge. I mean, they can get some facts and figures. I mean, you'll find that people, the Orientalists, they study Islam to the point that they become, near masters in the rudimentary rites and rituals, even, from the intricacies of hadith and its narrations and transmissions and all of that. They have written books about this stuff, but the iman, it's not in their heart. The faith, the love of Allah, the love for the Prophet, the desire for the hereafter is simply not there. And so they're never able to get past that initially bodily, or just a purely intellectual thing. Okay, so you can see the limitations of that. They do not surpass the outward appearance of the divine law and rulings to the realities of their inner dimensions and their significance in reference to divine gnosis. And so the light of the divine attributes and the knowledge of divine action radiated not in their hearts. They get fixated on performative Islam. Are you doing this? You're good. Are you doing that? You're bad. And I'm sure we've all experienced that and are familiar with that, where your faith is relegated to a couple of symbols, external symbols. Do you wear your pants like this? Does your beard look like that? Is your hijab tied like this? Now, while all of those things have a certain place in Islam, they're all important things. That is not the end. The end all. Those are the external rulings, not the internal realities. Okay, so if you're fixated on the external, how is Allah's light going to shine in your heart when you're not developing that? He says, whoever desired gnosis of Allah the Mighty and Majestic, whose spirit turned away from the world, again that's nafs, and its desires, and made their path to obtain to its obtainment, the book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. This is the path, right? To obtaining that is through the book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, will ascend from the outward Sunnah to its inner dimensions, if desired, with the success of the teachers acting as portals to it, and have the light of the book and the Sunnah radiate in the heart of its sincere seekers. It says, it is the light hidden within the code and rulings which act as veils from that light, or for that light, not to be removed except for the heart of the one who believes Allah in his quest and in seeking his gnosis and love, resulting by the will of Allah the Mighty and Majestic in its rending. Meaning you're going to rip that veil which covers you or conceals that gnosis, that awareness of Allah. You're going to have to rip through that veil by understanding and digging deep into the legal code and its rulings to get past the external, outer realities into the inner dimensions. Why is it like this? What's the benefit of this? What is the inner impact of this? Why do we pray like this? What's the point of raising our hands, putting them over our stomachs or our chests? Why do we bow? Why do we, instead of getting fixated on that external part, you have to look now inwardly. What is this meant to do for me inwardly? And that is how you will find the light of the Quran and the Sunnah radiating within you in the hearts of sincere seekers, as he says. In order to do that, you have to break through that initial layer. Whoever renders it or breaks through it, faith will enter their pure heart, and they will come to know the Mighty and Majestic Lord, who sent the prophets and his legal code and rulings by his names and attributes and actions. And the effects of those names and attributes will emerge in the hearts after knowledge of the rulings and legal code is obtained and taken as habitual adornment. Again, you cannot divorce the two. You cannot divorce religiosity and spirituality. They go hand in hand, supporting each other. Right? The rites and rituals of worship, they go hand in hand with spiritual development and divine awareness. It says, and thus the light will emanate in their heart, which is pleased and purified from the love of this world, and position, abstains from it, desires the hereafter and what resides with Allah, and loves divine gnosis and heavenly experience. It is well known that the veil which conceals that is nothing more than devoting one's aspirations to the world. This is what prevents us from getting to know Allah. we have aspirations for the world, desiring it and turning away from the love of Allah, the mighty, majestic, and divine proximity. We'd rather be close to the dunya than we would be to Allah in the hereafter. And that the path to its obtainment, coupled with asceticism, right? There has to be some self-denial. There has to be a practice of self-denial at some degree. So the path, along with that, is the Book of Allah, the mighty, majestic, and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ with the teacher's blessing, meaning his guidance, as previously mentioned.